For centuries, the vampires ruled the night. Beneath the stars, hidden from the eyes of mortal humans, their existence was one of secrecy, power, and dominance. They were creatures of the shadows, unseen kings and queens of the dark, whose influence stretched across every corner of the world. In this hidden society, the covens operated with precision, controlling territories, maintaining order, and ensuring that the fragile balance between the living and the undead was never broken. At the heart of one of the oldest covens stood Victor, an ancient vampire lord whose gaze had seen empires rise and fall. His power was unmatched, his reputation feared even among his own kind. Victor had long protected his domain, ensuring no human ever threatened their kind, and no vampire ever betrayed their ways. The night belonged to them, and he would see it remain that way. Standing beside him, ever loyal, was Lucian, a vampire warrior whose ferocity in battle was as legendary as Victor's rule. Lucian was a creature of few words but many actions, a hunter who thrived in the chaos of combat, always prepared to defend his master and their coven. For years, the nights had been quiet. Humans remained blissfully ignorant of the predators in their midst, and the vampires grew comfortable in their dominion. But recently, something had shifted in the air, something that not even Victor could ignore. There were strange ripples in the darkness, unfamiliar disturbances in the places vampires considered their own. It began with small things, the sudden silence of the forests, animals disappearing without trace, and the odd flickering of stars above. At first, Victor dismissed it as nothing more than nature's unpredictable whims, but Lucian's instincts told him otherwise. "We should investigate," Lucian said, breaking the silence of Victor's chambers. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay the tension of a seasoned warrior sensing danger. "There's something out there, something that doesn't belong." Victor, seated in a high-backed chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, met Lucian's gaze. "And what do you believe it to be? Another human folly? Their science meddling with things they do not understand?" Lucian shook his head. "No. This is different. I can feel it in the shadows. It's foreign." The word lingered in the air between them, heavy with implication. Foreign. There had been many threats to vampire kind over the centuries: human hunters, rogue vampires, even mystical forces from forgotten ages. But this was something else entirely. And though Victor had ruled with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, even he could not shake the unease creeping into the edges of his mind. "We will watch," Victor said at last, rising from his seat with a grace that belied his age. His eyes gleamed with an ancient fire. "If there is a threat, it will make itself known soon enough. The night has always belonged to us. It will remain that way." Despite Victor's assurances, the disturbances continued. One night, in the deep forests that bordered their territory, Lucian and a group of scouts witnessed something they could not explain. A low hum filled the air, unnatural and pulsating with a rhythm that set their teeth on edge. In the sky, lights flickered, not the pale moonlight they were accustomed to, but something harsher, sharper. A massive shape moved through the trees, too fast and too silent for any known creature. Whatever it was not of this world. The scouts were experienced hunters, but even they hesitated as the presence passed overhead. Lucian's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, his every instinct screaming that something was wrong, terribly wrong. When the shape finally disappeared into the night, he turned to his men, his face set in grim determination. "We need to report this to Victor," he said. His voice was low, urgent. Now. By the time Lucian and his team returned to Victor's estate, the tension had spread like wildfire through the coven. Whispers echoed through the halls, whispers of strange lights, of creatures that moved in ways that defied explanation. Fear, an emotion rare among vampires, crept into their hearts. Victor, standing before his gathered coven, listened as Lucian recounted what they had seen. "These are not humans," Lucian said, his voice carrying through the room. "There's something else. Something alien." The word was met with a stunned silence. For centuries, the vampires had been the dominant force in the shadows, their power unrivaled. But now, something new had arrived, something that did not care for the balance they had so carefully maintained. Victor's eyes burned with anger, but beneath it, Lucian could see a flicker of uncertainty. "If this alien threat dares to challenge us," Victor said, his voice cold and commanding, "they will learn that the night belongs to us. We will defend our domain." Lucian nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword once more. He had faced many enemies in his long life, but never one from beyond the stars. Still, the night was their world, and they would fight to reclaim it, no matter the cost. The first clash came under the cover of the thickest night, where even the moon dared not shine. Lucian led a squad of the most skilled vampire warriors into the forest where the alien presence had first been detected. They moved like shadows, silent and swift, their senses heightened by centuries of hunting in the dark. But this time, the prey was unlike anything they had ever faced. The aliens struck without warning. One moment, the vampires were advancing, their eyes scanning the treetops, their ears attuned to the faintest rustle of leaves. The next, the air was filled with a deafening hum, and the ground beneath them vibrated as if the earth itself was shuddering in fear. Bright, blinding lights cut through the darkness, disorienting the vampires. Lucian snarled as he was thrown off balance, his senses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar energy. The aliens appeared, tall, armored figures with shimmering skin that reflected the night in strange, iridescent patterns. They moved with the fluidity of predators, their weapons pulsing with energy that burned the very air around them. Lucian barely had time to react as one alien lunged toward him, its weapon raised to strike. With a speed that only a creature of the night could muster, he dodged the attack, countering with a swift slash of his sword. The blade cut through the air, but it glanced off the alien's armor, leaving nothing more than a faint scratch. "They're shielded!" Lucian shouted, his voice rough with frustration. The other vampires fared no better. Their usual tactics, speed, strength, and stealth, seemed useless against the invaders. The aliens fought with precision, their technology far beyond anything the vampires had encountered before. Lucian realized, with a cold shock, that this wasn't just an invasion. It was a hunt, and for the first time in centuries, the vampires were not the hunters. Desperate to regroup, Lucian signaled the retreat, his warriors pulling back into the thick shadows of the forest. The aliens did not pursue, they didn't need to. Their message was clear. They had come to dominate, and even the creatures of the night were not beyond their reach. When Lucian returned to Victor's estate, his pride was as wounded as his body. His squad had sustained casualties. Several of his warriors were still recovering from wounds that burned with a strange, unnatural heat. Victor stood at the head of the great hall, his expression unreadable as Lucian reported the defeat. "They're unlike anything we've ever faced," Lucian said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "They don't fight like humans. They're faster, stronger, and their technology, we can't even get close to them." The hall was silent, the gathered vampires absorbing the gravity of Lucian's report. Fear lingered in the air like a thick fog, but it was pride that hung even heavier. Vampires were not accustomed to defeat. "What do you suggest?" Victor asked, his tone deceptively calm. Lucian hesitated. In his long life, he had fought countless battles, but none had left him so uncertain. The vampires were powerful, but they had always relied on their physical dominance, their ability to overpower and outmaneuver their enemies in the dark. Against these aliens, those advantages meant little. "We can't face them head-on," Lucian admitted. "Their technology is beyond us. But they don't know the night like we do. They don't know our world. We have to use that." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the coven. Some of the younger vampires bristled at the idea of retreat or subterfuge. They wanted to charge into battle, to prove their strength. But Victor raised a hand, silencing them. "We will not be rash," Victor said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries. "These aliens believe themselves superior. They think they can conquer our world with their machines and their weapons. But the night is still ours. We will make them see that." Still, there were divisions within the coven. Some vampires, particularly those who had grown accustomed to their dominion over humans, argued for immediate retaliation, demanding that they strike at the heart of the alien force. Others, like Lucian, urged caution, recognizing the need for strategy and cunning over brute force. The Coven had never been truly united. Rivalries between factions had persisted for centuries, kept in check only by Victor's iron rule. But now, with the alien threat looming, those old tensions flared. In a private moment, Lucian approached Victor once more. "If we don't act soon, the Coven will tear itself apart," Lucian said quietly. "Some of the younger ones are restless. They want to fight. If you don't give them direction, they'll take matters into their own hands." Victor's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "Then we will give them a target. But it will be on our terms, not theirs." Lucian nodded. It was a delicate balance. The vampires had never been united in the way humans rallied under banners. They had always been creatures of individual ambition, but now, with their very existence threatened, unity was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. The plan was simple, but it relied on what the vampires did best: stealth, precision, and the ability to strike where their enemies least expected it. They would not engage the aliens directly. Instead, they would lure them into the darkest parts of the world, into the shadows where the vampires held the advantage. Lucian and his warriors would become the night itself, moving unseen through the landscape, striking from the edges and retreating before the aliens could retaliate. As the Coven prepared for war, Lucian could feel the tension rising. They were fighting for more than just survival. They were fighting for their place in the world, for their right to rule the night. And though the aliens had proven themselves formidable, the vampires were not ready to give up their dominion. The ambush was set. Deep within the forest, where the trees twisted into ancient, gnarled shapes and the ground was soft with centuries of fallen leaves, Lucian and his warriors waited. The air was still, the only sound the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. The vampires were motionless, their forms blending seamlessly with the darkness, as if they were part of the night itself. Above, the stars were veiled by a thick layer of clouds, casting the world in a near-total blackness that would have paralyzed human eyes. But for the vampires, it was their realm, their advantage. Lucian crouched at the edge of the clearing, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. Beside him, Victor stood tall, his presence a calm force amidst the tension. Every vampire in the clearing could feel it. The moment of reckoning was near. The aliens were coming, drawn by the carefully laid trail of false energy signatures the vampires had planted throughout the forest. They believed they were hunting the vampires, but in truth, they were being lured into a trap. "They'll expect us to attack head-on," Victor whispered, his voice barely audible. "But we won't give them the satisfaction. Remember the plan." Lucian nodded, his gaze fixed on the tree line ahead. They had learned from their earlier defeat. The aliens' technology made direct combat a losing game, but the vampires had something far more ancient than technology: patience, strategy, and the endless dark. Their plan was simple: strike from the shadows, confuse the invaders, and dismantle them piece by piece. A faint hum began to echo through the trees. It was the sound of the alien machines, growing louder, closer. Lucian's muscles tensed, every sense sharp, every instinct screaming for action. The hum intensified until the forest itself seemed to vibrate with it. The aliens were near. Then, without warning, the first of the alien soldiers entered the clearing. Tall, armored figures, their skin glinting under the faint starlight, moved with the cold precision of hunters. Their weapons, glowing with eerie energy, swept back and forth as they scanned the area. More followed, their formation tight, disciplined. Lucian's hand tightened around his sword, but he held his position. The moment to strike had not yet come. As the aliens spread out, creeping further into the trap, Victor gave the signal. It was a barely perceptible nod, but it was all Lucian needed. The vampires moved as one, slinking through the shadows like phantoms. They circled the clearing, their movements too swift and silent for even the advanced alien sensors to detect. Lucian's heart pounded as he slipped behind the lead alien. He drew his blade in one fluid motion, the metal catching a sliver of moonlight as it arced through the air. The strike was precise, aimed at the joint between the alien's helmet and chest armor. The creature made no sound as it collapsed, its body crumpling into the undergrowth. Before the others could react, chaos erupted. Vampires descended upon the invaders from all sides, striking and vanishing before the aliens could regroup. Lucian moved through the battlefield with lethal efficiency, his sword flashing in the dark as he cut down another soldier, then another. The aliens' weapons fired blindly into the night, their beams of energy illuminating nothing but empty air. They were powerful, yes, but their power was useless against an enemy they could not see. For every alien that fell, the vampires grew bolder. The tide of battle had shifted, and now it was the invaders who were disoriented, confused. Lucian could sense their frustration, their inability to adapt to a fight they couldn't control. These creatures, who had come to conquer, were being hunted like prey. Victor fought alongside his warriors, his movements as fluid and deadly as they had been centuries ago. With each alien he felled, the balance of power tipped further in their favor. The vampires were relentless, pushing the aliens back into the very trap they had set. One by one, the invaders fell until the clearing was littered with their bodies, their shimmering armor now darkened with the blood of defeat. When the last alien collapsed, silence settled over the forest once more. The vampires stood victorious, their eyes gleaming in the faint light. Lucian wiped the blood from his blade and turned to Victor, whose gaze surveyed the battlefield with a grim satisfaction. "They underestimated us," Victor said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the centuries. "They thought their machines would save them, but they forgot one simple truth." Lucian sheathed his sword, nodding. "The night belongs to us." For a moment, there was no sound but the whisper of the wind through the trees. The vampires had reclaimed their domain, proving once again that no matter the threat, be it human or alien, the darkness was their territory. They had fought for it, bled for it, and now, they stood as the undisputed rulers of the night. But even as the victory settled, Lucian couldn't shake a lingering thought. The aliens had been defeated, yes, but they had come from somewhere beyond the stars. And where one invasion failed, another might follow. Victor, sensing Lucian's unease, placed a hand on his shoulder. "We've won this battle, but there will be more. Let them come. We will be ready." And as the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the vampires vanished into the shadows once more, leaving behind only the memory of their victory and the promise that, in the end, the night would always be theirs.